The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian, Miss Berlin, Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security. Hey.
Hello.
How is everybody this week?
Fantastic. I'm not sick anymore.
That's good. It's been a couple weeks. Most people don't realize it, but we recorded all of Marcus's podcast over the last 2 weeks. We've been releasing it, so I got a lot out of Marcus's discussion. There were people who are on Twitter right now going, "Oh, I didn't realize there was a Blue Team book coming out," and I'm like, it's in the show notes. And appreciate everybody, checking out the show. Marcus has got a lot of good books coming out with that. The Tribe Hackers series is going like gangbusters. If you're interested in hearing what Marcus is doing there with attack simulation, also, and with the Tribe Hackers book series, you can go back and check out those 2 episodes. And always great having Marcus on. And we have another great interview this week. Kind of extends the attack simulation bit, because the gentleman we've got on this week. Sorry, I haven't been drinking far enough.
Might as well be a whole month.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, February's taking forever.
I know, right? God, it's just
we're only halfway through.
I know, and I'm busier than hell. So we're adding not just to attack simulation, but we're going to be talking about threat hunting, threat intelligence. I think they're the same thing, but just different sides of the same coin. Maybe our interviewer can help us out with that. Going to go ahead and introduce Roberto Rodriguez to the show. Welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you guys for the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. All right. So everybody's got an origin story. How did you get where you are today? Maybe you could give us a little bio there.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think that my career started a little different than a lot of people that I've talked to. I actually was doing computer network security in this college in Delaware. And I wasn't that into it, actually. I was just kind of like, okay, this is cool, but I'm not feeling it as much. And then I started going to a couple of competitions, a couple of CTFs in college and a couple of other events. And I didn't feel much of the collaboration. I didn't feel much of the enthusiasm to help a lot of people. And I think that kind of like, got me thinking a little bit. I remember going back one day to my house and I was like, okay, obviously I'm not fitting in as much. A lot of people are not showing interest either to help as much. And I was a little frustrated. I want to be honest. I was a little frustrated that was not a thing, because I was in zero. Like I didn't understand as much. I'm still learning a lot right now. Still, I feel like there is a lot more to learn. And I decided just to grab some books, started to talking to a few people just to tell me which books they were reading. And that's when kind of like the passion started, because I wanted to also, prove myself that I could do it on my own as well, since I didn't feel it as much from the community side. And that's why also I'm doing a lot of stuff for the community nowadays, because I wanted to start giving back. And, there might be some people that might be also feeling a little bit that way. So how better than just start sharing it. After that, I started doing some IT work. I started, working in a small IT shop in Delaware. I got the opportunity to do my first cybersecurity job in, DuPont, actually in Delaware. I worked there for at least 2 years, almost 3 years in there. I started doing some basic incident response, some SOC work, also threat intelligence. Our team was only 5 people, so we were trying to cover every single field of the whole picture of cyber in the company. Then I got the opportunity to work at Capital One, where I started looking into all these open source tools being put together to build these massive applications to do some analytics and things like that. So that was my first time that I actually saw open source tools being used at scale. So scalability was huge in there. I started doing some consulting, and then I got into also AWS, where I started now seeing some of the real big large queries with a lot of massive data. And I started getting more interested into that aspect, into how can I start, building a couple of things on my own as well. So a lot of applications were built through this whole career, and now I'm working at Microsoft, where I'm given the opportunity to do a lot with the community now and sharing a lot of more of the things that I've been building for the past couple of years. So that's kind of like a summary of all these years of doing cyber, I guess.
That's fantastic. So where were
Yeah.
you at that you said you weren't learning very much and didn't come away with that? Was it a college or a university, or was it an event somewhere? And you don't have to say name names or anything, but it wasn't an event or like,
Yeah, it wasn't an event. A couple of universities have a couple of events, some internal, some of them are externals, depends on, who's organized. This was like a little external event from this university that I was at. Actually, Wilmington University is where I went to. So Wilmington University in Delaware actually has some great stuff going on. And I decided just to explore some other events outside of the school because I met some people and see, what they were doing. And of course, I'm not going to mention some of the names externally, but I think that was something going on in Delaware that made me feel a little different and changed a lot, actually. I felt that if that wouldn't have happened to me, like who would have known? Like I didn't know if I was going to be doing cyber, but that little thing kind of like I took that a little bit of negative experience, external events, and I turned it a little bit into something positive. Like, how can I just keep doing this on my own and then just share as much as I can whenever I can. And that's why there's a lot of open source projects out there and hopefully helping people in the industry as well. So,
that's nice. Okay. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
So as I was talking earlier, I said threat intel and threat hunting, I think, are both sides of the same coin. We actually have in our Slack, on the BreakSec Slack, we have a threat hunting channel and we have a threat intel channel. And I'm like, I don't see the difference, but everybody's like, oh man, it's completely different and everything. And I'm like, okay, well, help me understand why they're so different. It seems to me you hunt for threats, and then when you tell people about it, that's the intel. So it's the exact same thing, right?
Yeah. So I would say that it depends on, so to me, I consider those actually two different things that complement each other, because there is a lot of things where they start merging actually into the information that you can provide when you start doing hunting. Now, hunting, of course, from my perspective, hunting is not just running a rule or analytic and then just getting results and then passing to somebody else, right? Hunting starts all the way from even understanding your data internally, understanding how it is even standardized, how you can start using different data sets to be create that logic that would allow you to get to a specific detection, right? So those are the things that I would say, like, the hunter or the data analyst, in my opinion, a data analyst is pretty much a hunter as well, right? Because you're just going through so much data and trying to find specific techniques and behavior. I think that when you start getting into that level, into how you start managing the data, start understanding the data, creating detections and all that, that's when you start differentiating yourself a little bit from a threat intel analyst. I think that they, from my experience, I've seen a lot of threat intel analysts that some of them could be actually just receiving the intel from a vendor. Others actually tracking all these adversaries, understanding the TDPs and all of that. And I think that when you start getting into that way of managing the threat landscape, internal and external, that's when you start differentiating yourself a little bit. But they complement each other because, of course, a threat hunter or data analyst who does not have a use case or probably a technique that they could start focusing on, perform some additional research. There is when you complement a little bit, with the threat intel analyst, which will provide that expertise about a specific actor or give you a high level overview, some TTPs, and then the threat hunter should go dive deeper into that specific research and then take it to the data, for analysis and all that. So that's how kind of like separate them a little bit, both of them, but they complement each other a lot, of course.
Okay, that's cool.
When I hear threat intel, I'm thinking, okay, that's what the antivirus vendors use, and they automatically put it in their tools, and I don't have to worry about that. I think what some people think of threat intel is more like, say, malware management, or reading these malware reports and saying, okay, there's a technique that they're using they're putting, let's say, some data in the registry in this particular location. Okay, so let me go hunt for that in my environment, right?
Mhm.
Is that what, am I off base there?
No, no. I think from my experience, I've actually seen threat intel teams that divide themselves into the ones getting all this intel either from external or doing some either threat modeling inside of their environment, getting that information, passing it to the ones that will be focusing more on the data analysis piece. I've seen that, and they belong to the same thing, the threat intelligence team. So some organizations just separate that and they say this is two different teams, but I've seen those two in the same team. So I would say that that's when you start feeling like, oh, they might be the same. But I like to kind of separate it more from whoever does the data analysis piece, whoever tries to understand the telemetry that you have and perform the additional research to understand the specific technique. I think that's when you start differentiating a little bit more, because it takes a lot of time, in my opinion, to start going deeper into these techniques. And I think that that's when you want a separate team doing that. But I've seen those two things in one team called threat intelligence as well in a company that I used to work for as well. So
Yeah, I mean,
very interesting topic.
I do both sides every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it just depends on, I think, where you sit at in an organization, and
I agree. Mm-hmm.
yeah, what your end goal is, right? Because like we're doing it for our
Yes.
customers as like a SaaS provider, so
Yep.
we not only help them hunt for the threats inside their organization, but we also like create new alerts and detections and stuff like that. So that includes like the intelligence part.
But those are kind of the same thing, right? If an organization doesn't have the tool that's built already, right? The SIM that's looking for the certain things.
Yep.
You have to go hunt for those first, right? Do they have this already, right? Or maybe they don't have the infrastructure, or maybe they have RDP or something like that, or WMI. Then you can go look for that in all the boxes. But if they're not sucking up all their logs and all that data into a SIM, you really can't do a centralized hunting, right?
No, I can't even imagine doing threat hunting without this log aggregation. There's just
Yes.
no. I mean,
Well,
you can.
sometimes you have to.
When I was doing consulting, there were some use cases where some people didn't want you to touch their tools, right? So at the end of the day, you had to come up with some scripts, right, to start scanning the environment, putting all that back, pushing it to our own little tools, or just analyzing it with some programming languages, PowerShell or Python, doing some like basic statistical analysis on the top of that data, saved in CSV files, saved in JSON files. So it's very painful. Very painful.
Sounds like it.
So
Yes.
I've got a question. So I before we started recording, I said y'all are going to have to handhold me because I'm just an ignorant PM here. But so you mentioned data sets and you're building data sets, and it sounds like log aggregation is one ingredient that you need to be able to do proper threat hunting. Did you start with a particular data set or a particular database of, I don't know, indicators of compromise, or did you have to generate that? And what are you using to classify that? Because obviously with all that data, you got to be able to classify stuff as threats or non-threats.
Yeah. So first, from a database perspective, you mean like to aggregate, what I believe was malicious, what I believe it was not malicious, like an Intel database? Or are you talking about like a SIM database where I aggregate my logs and I can tag them and all that?
Well, I was thinking along the lines of the data sets. I was just wondering, did you start with something that was already out there and improve upon that, or did you have to generate your own indicators and threats?
Oh, okay. Yes. So I had to, of course, build it on my own, because there are not too many data sets out there, things that I can learn from a data perspective. There are a few old ones, but I decided to start building my own, and that's what the other project also, which is open source, Mordor, came out, where I started using some, known C2 frameworks that are just, public open source as well. And I started documenting, the techniques, and I started also collecting the data from my starting the attack all the way to when I stop the attack and I get the data set and I start analyzing it. Once I'm done, I share it with the community, and then they can also do a similar work, or if I missed anything, they can just also analyze it. So yeah, I started building my own. Yeah.
So you used like honeypots and networks that were deliberately vulnerable to gain those IOCs in that case.
Yeah, so what I do a lot is I try to learn about the technique first, so try to understand exactly what it is that might be going on, in order also for me to configure my environment, because there is a lot of, for example, techniques that require you to do some tweaking on some computers. So I just build my environment in the cloud, and I started just understanding what configurations will be helpful to allow me to capture that specific behavior. So one example could be if an adversary wants to gather their data from a specific registry key, and I don't have something, let's say like sysmon, for example, I will need to tweak and create a specific rule to generate that data once someone touches the registry key. So doing some tweaking as I learn about the TTP is how I start doing my own stuff. Yep.
Okay. Very cool.
In that case, you would need access to the endpoint to
Correct.
reconfigure their or to put in a logging for that particular key.
Correct. Yes, but I do everything on a lab environment first. So in my lab environment, when I build it, that's actually another project that is also open source. It's called Blacksmith. Blacksmith allows you to create the Mordor environment, and that environment is easy custom. You can customize it, pushing PowerShell scripts or just bash or just any scripts that you want to add on the top of the system, either a Windows or any other operating system, and then you can just configure that automatically once the environment comes up. So if I'm analyzing something that might need an extra tweak, I just push a PowerShell script when the build is happening, and then I can just have that extra telemetry being created once I execute the specific technique. So
nice. Yep. Okay.
Yep. We can talk about a lot of projects.
Yeah. It all kind of fits together, don't it?
Yes.
So, is the idea of Mordor just for lab, or more like the enterprise?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So Mordor datasets, because Mordor keeps the datasets on a GitHub repository. Those are good for, I would say, first, teaching anybody, some research going on. But you can actually use Mordor datasets, the data itself, and you can push it to for example, pipeline, a data pipeline that you might have in your environment already. And if you tweak the data set to make it look like your environment, you can actually have like a data injection of a technique. You can inject a specific technique to your data pipeline, and we'll get to your SIM. From a building the environment perspective, the project is called Blacksmith. So Blacksmith build the environment for Mordor. Mordor is just a repo with data. Blacksmith is the one with tools to allow you to build it. And you can just add as many computers in there as you want, of course, as long as you know what you're doing with the cloud providers and understanding how everything will build. And you might build a big environment that you might use for anything than just research as well. So
I think it would be good for testing out to make sure your SIM's actually doing something.
Yes, it's very interesting. I met a lot of people that were telling me they use, of course, the Atomic Red Team project from Red Canary, and that's great because that just triggers things on your endpoint. But what about your pipeline? Like, how do you know that data is getting all the way to your SIM? And also, something that I like about Mordor datasets is that some datasets might take hours, might take sometimes days. Why is that? Because I need to figure it out how the technique works, how to replicate that research. And if I give you the data set, you're pretty much closer to the data analysis rather than trying to produce the data itself. So that's kind of actually one of the advantages as well. The way how I see it is like we have researchers around the world. Let's say 100 researchers trying to do the same technique, trying to replicate the same technique. But then one researcher figures it out in a day, and the other 99 figures it out in a week because they don't know how to use some of the tools and all that. if the one researcher that figures it out shares the data set, it might actually help 99 researchers out there that really wanted to get to the data and not just learn so much about how to run Empire or Covenant and all these C2 frameworks that might allow you to replicate that technique. So that's actually one of the ideas of Mordor also, is to share with the community and expedite the process to get to data that you want to analyze.
So let's say I'm a threat hunter. I'm brand new at my job, and somebody says, "Oh, we need to investigate process hollowing because bad guys using process hollowing to do evil shit on our network." I don't know how to do that. What's the collaborative environment for threat hunters out there to be able to learn this stuff, or is it a lot of experimentation, like you said, setting up Mordor, using Blacksmith and whatever to capture that and to capture those logs, or to capture the almost like forensic artifacts to be able to figure that out? What's the environment like, or how long does it take to actually find these kinds of things or to learn these skills?
Right. So I would say that there is a lot of documentation out there first, right? To learn about this specific type of, process injection, for example, right? Process hollowing, how it can be used for the process injection, right? So the documentation is out there, so it wouldn't take as much to somebody to figure out also some additional tools that might be already out there in the wild. I don't remember one that does that. Probably the Atomic Red Teaming will have an example, but I would say that understanding the attack, understanding the specific steps that you might take, that might be easier nowadays with all these sharing of techniques out there. I think that how to execute it also should be easier than before for somebody just to figure it out. The problem that I think that you get to is what you were saying, how to set up the environment. It's like how do I even, for example, if I set up a for example Windows box, there's gonna be potentially Windows Defender stopping it right away if I just use a tool that is known. So I might not get to the data that I want to start seeing what it actually look like. The other issue that one could get to is actually, is there any telemetry that would tell you that this actually happened?
Right.
For example, Sysmon allows you to only with event ID 8 in Sysmon allows you to see create remote threats, for example, that would tell you, okay, somebody used these specific APIs to do that specific action. But when you start getting into some other process injection types, then you won't be able to see it. So I think that that's also another obstacle. How do I get to some data sets or telemetry that would allow me to see that? There is what I believe is where you start getting some issues where you might have to either enable some new telemetry on your box through enabling some ETW providers that might not be enabled by default. So you start getting into this type of research, additional research. And I think that as a junior threat hunter might take you a long time. So those are the use cases that I believe will be awesome to start working together with other researchers. But it's something that I wouldn't see it as easy. Somebody just starting trying to come up with some full use case, detection playbook with your data set. It might be a little harder than it might look like. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sharing data and collaboration and putting all of your playbooks online requires a unified data format, and you're using JSON, which is great. How you're just putting these playbooks up on your GitHub. Is there any way that you're protecting them from being tampered with? Because it seems like people wanting to use your your playbooks that are open source, they have all the indicators of compromise, or the things to look for if you're a bad guy. If I was a bad guy and I've come across your site, what would keep me from injecting my own false information into those playbooks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say that it depends. So let's put it this way. So if anybody wants to, break in and edit these playbooks, I think that they're capable to do it. Right? There's a lot of things that could be done. I'm using some additional security on the top of my account, which is the only one that has access to a lot of these things to be edited and all of the stuff. one of the things that I'm actually doing with the playbooks is that in order for me to share them with the community, I'm using this open infrastructure in the cloud. So pretty much anyone who wants to run these notebooks from the website that I have also, 300playbook.com, they're all being executed on a free open environment, which is considered just for research. And I think that adds an extra layer of, if you want to test this, you can test it in this open environment in the cloud. Doesn't cost you anything. And you can actually just experience that somewhere else rather than do it also in your own SIEM. If there is a case that somebody actually would tamper with all these detections, I think that adds an extra layer from my perspective of what will happen if somebody tries to execute all this. It will happen in the cloud.
And that was it for part 1 of our discussion with Roberto Rodriguez on threat hunting, threat intel, and Hunter's Forge. Next week, you're going to hear us talk about all kinds of things, including Jupyter Notebooks, discussions about YAML, interactive notebooks, Blacksmith, some more development techniques on how to set up your own threat hunting environment. So don't forget us. Come back and download part 2 next week. If you are interested in talking more with Roberto Rodriguez about threat hunting and threat intel, you can find him on Twitter at CyberWardog. That's CYB3RWARD0G. And you can also, the Slack that we talk about next week, also you can find it at launchpass.com/threat hunting, and that'll get you an invite to the Slack. Let's see what's left. Miss Berlin is a big fan of trying to help hackers with their mental health issues, and she started a nonprofit to do so. You can follow her on Twitter at InfoSister, INFOSYSTIR, or at Hackers Health. Friendly reminder, she's also going to be giving NolaCon training on security, defense, and detect. We can't call it the other thing because of copyright issues, so it's like role-playing, defense, and detect. There you go. If you're interested in that, tickets are still available for that, and that's at NolaCon. She's also be giving it at a couple of other places, including InfoSec Campout 2020, which is the conference that I run up here in the Seattle area. There'll be more information on how you can sign up for that class here in the Seattle area if you can't make it then. Mr. Betcher is the other third of our cadre here of podcasters. You can follow him on Twitter at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. We have a Slack as well, BreakSec Slack. If you're interested in getting on that, you can send us an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com, or you can send a DM to our Twitter at BreakSec, which is our official podcast Twitter. And, if you get time, you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm at Brian Brake. That's with a Y and BRAKE. We are on pretty much every podcast service you could ever find, including Pandora recently. Found that out. So if you go on to Pandora and look under podcasts and search for Breaking Down Security, you can find us pretty easily. We're also on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud. We have a YouTube channel. One other thing. We have a book club going on. David Sybuck and JB, our moderators, are starting that up on the 24th of February, which is in a few days, on Monday night for the U.S. folks, and I believe European, Middle East, and Asia group, the EMEA group, is on Saturday mornings U.S. time. We'll be reading Hands-On AWS Penetration Testing with Kali Linux. The book will help you set up your virtual lab and be able to help you pen test major AWS services, including things like EC2, S3, Lambdas, and CloudFormation. It was written by Carl Gilbert and Benjamin Caudill of RhinoSec. Ben, of course, has been on the show a few times, most recently with Spencer Geitzen to talk about Paku, which is their AWS framework they use for doing all kinds of testing against their environment. If you're interested in that, they have a Kindle or a paperback version, like I said, so you can check that out. We're starting on the 24th for the U.S. folks, which is Monday. Next Monday. I'm recording this part on the 18th. So next Monday, and I believe March 1st will be when the European and Asian version of the podcast or the book club starts. So there you go. If you have more information, feel free to send us a DM and get on the Slack and ask the moderators questions. I can't guarantee I'll be at every episode, but I do want to try to make it to a couple of the sessions myself. So, I'd like to thank our Patreon donors. Thank them every month for giving us a little bit in our tip jar to help offset costs for hosting, just time and effort putting out a podcast and moderating a community. So we appreciate their help with all of that. It goes to very good cause, and we appreciate it. If you are looking to get T-shirts or mugs or stickers or anything, we have a TeePub store, so you can go to teepublic.com/user/BDS podcast, and you can grab anything you'd like. Even last year's InfoSec Campout T-shirt is on there, so if you're interested in grabbing that, you can. Whatever podcast platform you use, we'd love it if you could leave us some feedback, because we really do thrive on the goodwill and the good word of others that is spread out there. So if you've found value in this, and you don't want to give anything on Patreon, which is fair, feedback is just as good as gold in our respect. It gets more awareness for others to find our podcast. So I appreciate it. All right, well, we'll be back next week, of course, like I said, with Roberto Rodriguez to do part 2. We appreciate you listening, and that was it. So have a great week. Be kind to one another. Take care of yourselves, because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.